On this episode of the Speedster Rebuild, I'm going to show you how you can lower your car using stock Ford parts, cheap. If you remember from the last episode, this car has a lot of like little tiny errors and issues. Nothing like really bad, like terrible bad, that can't be fixed. And one of the things is the front end. This has got an early spindle arm on it that interferes with the wishbone to the point where the wishbone actually is rubbing on the tie rod. And that's because partway through production, Ford switched from what they call like the over-the-top wishbone to an underneath. This has got the underneath wishbone with the over-the-top spindle, and they collide. So I've got a fix for that, and it's gonna kill two birds with one stone. One, it's gonna bring the spindle arm back up to where it's supposed to be, and it's also gonna lower the car an inch. So here you can see the straight spindle arm, and you can see where it's actually rubbing. So if it was to go over a bump, it would actually hit the radius rod. On the other side of the car, it's not an issue. You can see that that arm has actually got a curve to it, and it gives it plenty of room here. It gives it plenty of room that actually clears that radius rod. So we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna pull this spindle assembly off both sides, and we're gonna switch it for the late model 26/7 spindle. That 26/7 spindle actually lowers the car an inch, which is good in our case, because when you're building Speedsters, having that look is part of it, or is a good part of it, a big part of it. And so we're gonna go ahead and drop this car an inch, and it's actually in our favor because I'll show you why. It's hard to see it here, but the car doesn't sit level, and maybe you can see it a little bit. The issue is they've lowered the back, but they haven't lowered the front of the car. Here, the top of the fender sits really close to about 34 inches, where if we move up to the front, the top of the fender is sitting really, really close to 35 inches. So we can easily bring that down an inch. It's gonna help with a couple of things. It's gonna help with the look, it's gonna help with the controllability, and it's going to, just give it a better stance, so the car is going to be looking like it's sitting level instead of the nose being high. I'm also thinking, just to give it more of that hot rod look, thinking about reversing the front leaf. It doesn't take very long, and I've got a really, really cheap, easy way that just about anybody could do if they have some scrap iron laying around, a hydraulic press, and a peeling off the hubcaps. If you're familiar with Model T spindles, they both have left and right hand threads. So on the left hand side of the car, it's gonna be right hand thread, and on the right hand side of the car, should be left hand thread. And that isn't on the nut, but it's actually on the spindle bearing itself. The bearings are threaded. They figured out by the Model A that wasn't necessary. You could have two left hand nuts on there, but that's what we're working with, and so that's what we gotta deal with. Here's an opportunity to see the difference between a 26/7 and the early ones. When everything is lined up, 6/7 spindle sits up higher, so effectively lowers the front of the car down a bit. So that should look pretty good once it's all set up. Now that this tie rod is off, go ahead and pull out the kingpin cotter pin, and there's a wrong size wrench. We'll grab the universal crescent wrench here. So the kingpin is threaded on the bottom with a nut, which you can see. And if you're not familiar with these, the kingpin is actually threaded, or should be threaded, into the axle. It's very important that the axle threads are good, because if they're bad, you can't tighten up the kingpin into the bushings and all of that. All right, so that is out. We'll go ahead and lay it down here, and maybe again I'll show you that 26/7 spindle laid up against it. You can see that this one's offset, where this is right smack dab in the middle. So go ahead and fit this. A little bit tight, we'll see. This has got brand new bushings in it, which is why it's tight. Kingpin fits nice. That's all been honed out and ready to go. So, Model Ts always wear on the top side of the bushing because the weight of the car is there, and they don't wear on the bottom. So where they do wear is the hole becomes oblong on the bottom and not so much on the top. So what you can do is we can take some material off the bottom of this bushing so it fits inside of this axle. All right, spindle is in. So this is a reproduction Kingpin. And one of the things that I like to do that isn't included here is they've got a little oiler here to oil the Kingpin. And the oil hole only goes to the top bushing. And I find that to be a problem because it's the bottom bushing that takes all the side thrust and wear. So there's no way for that oil to really get past that top bushing. So I like to take and just grind a little flat spot from here to about here so that any oil can run past the upper bushing and lubricate the lower bushing. Little flat spot on there. Now the oil can get past. So we'll go ahead and tighten this Kingpin back up. So we got a little bit of drag on it. What we're shooting for. Just like that. Perfect. Go ahead and put the nut back on. Now I'll go ahead and finish tightening this up, get the other side done, and we'll remeasure. There we go. We're at 34 inches. So much better now. The old hot rod trick was to reverse the eye. So what that means is basically we're going to take this spring, and instead of the spring coming above the top of the shackle, we'll have the spring come from the bottom side. So we're going to basically lower the car the equivalent of however thick this spring is. Here we'll measure off the bottom of the front cross member to the floor, and that'll give us the total height that we are now. And then once we do the reverse, that will we'll take another measurement, figure out where we sit. So from the floor to the bottom of the cross member is 17 inches. I can already tell that the spring is a put together because the first leaf is actually covering the spring shackle hole. So getting in there to actually oil and lubricate the shackles looks like a bit of a chore. Also, the springs aren't evenly spaced, so that's a good indication that somebody's been here, done something. A stock spring should have, for a Roadster, should have about 7 leaves. So once we get apart, we'll count how many leaves are in it, and we might have to do a complete spring rebuild. Spring is out. It's got 7 leaves like it's supposed to have, but they're not right. So these are just, this is just a homemade put together spring, enough to get the car under its own weight. So these two should be significantly shorter, and they should be more evenly spaced. You can kind of see that this one's long. It's gonna have to be shortened up anyway, because when we reverse this spring, this bottom spring here is just gonna be basically ramming up against this eyelet. So we're gonna have to shorten it up in order to make that work, which is gonna be fine because it'll line up nicely and look more spaced evenly to the next leaf up. The other ones, on the other hand, they're not right. I'll tear this spring apart, and then I'm going to basically respring the spring back the other way. So I'm gonna turn it inside out. That will put our grease hole on the bottom, but not the end of the world. We can work around that. This is our main spring leaf. I'm gonna go ahead and just lay this on the ground. Pretty simple. I here have a piece of soapstone, and I'm just gonna arc, just basically lay that arc on the ground. Pretty simple, right? All right, here's my really janky spring reverser. So what we're gonna do, or what I'm gonna do, is I'm just gonna feed this thing through here, like so, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I'm gonna take this arch, and I'm going to basically unarch it. So I'm gonna start here. Just working my way back and forth until that arch is going the opposite direction. There's the spring re-arched. I've actually put a little bit more arch in it than it had originally, which it's not a bad thing because the spring was kind of flat to begin with. So I'll go to modifying the other leaves, and then we'll stick this thing in there, get a measurement, and see where we're at. So I told you that you could lower your car by basically not spending any money. And this is a perfect example. I had a 20-ton bottle jack. This is a pretty cheap one from Harbor Freight, but it does exactly what you need it to do. This is just made out of scrap angle iron. It is uglier than sin, but as you can tell, it does the job exactly like it's supposed to. Only tools you need is a really crappy Harbor Freight welder, some really crappy angle iron, and some time. And you too can be re-arching your springs and lowering the front end of your car. All right, well, that spring pack is all put back together again. You can see that I went ahead and shortened up that leaf, just ground her down, cut her off. The other ones I just made work. I shortened up this one like it's supposed to be. Yeah, it's ready to go back in, so let's get to it. Reuse these spring shackles. They're shot, so I'm gonna have to buy some new ones to put in here. The bushings don't look that bad, and the bushings of the springs aren't that bad either, but the shackles are well worn. So I'll be going to the antique auto ranch here in town, picking up a new set of shackles to go into there. But we can, I can stuff it in just to have a look, see what it's gonna look like. Okay. Everything is just put in there loose. Go ahead and jack it up, get the weight off the jack stands. Go. Pull those jack stands out of the way. Oh yeah, that looks pretty substantial already. That looks so good. Looks sick. All right. Woo! That baby's sitting pretty. We are down to almost 16 inches, so that was a easily a whole inch drop there. I think it's just, yeah, right at 16 inches. A pretty good job. So once I get the new shackles put in, I'll go ahead and bolt up the rest of the front end, make sure everything is good and tight. But this at least gives us an idea of how to quickly lower the front of your car 2 inches fairly easily. I think I'm out here for a couple of hours, so It's well worth it, and it looks really cool when it's all done. Well, that about wraps it up for this project this evening. So if you have any questions in regards to this car and any of the processes that I did, feel free to comment down below. Give this video a like, and a subscribe would be awesome. And follow along as I continue to build and continue to fix and get this car back on the road again. Front end is getting close to being buttoned up. Next, I think I'm going to work on the firewall and how that's all going to shape up. I've got parts coming in and kind of going through some sheet metal working. So that should be pretty exciting. Got to fit everything kind of towards the middle. That means yeah, steering, firewall, all the doodads that go along with that. So appreciate everyone watching, and I'll catch you next time around. Have a good one.